We acknowledge and pay our respects to the Kaurna people, the traditional custodians whose ancestral lands we live and work on. We acknowledge the deep feelings of attachment and relationship of the Kaurna people to country, and we respect and value their past, present, and ongoing connection to country and their cultural beliefs. We extend that recognition and respect to all Aboriginal and First Nations people. Welcome back to Amy and I'm Amy Matthews. I'm here with Justina Ashman. Hey, Justina.
Hi.
Today we're going to be interviewing Jennifer Mills, and it's part of our climate fiction month. So every week this month we're looking at climate fiction, and Jennifer is an award-winning author who has circled around climate fiction and dystopias for most of her career. And we're super excited to talk to her about her upcoming novel Salvage, which is out for release May 27th this year. So Jen is an author, editor, and critic based on Kaurna here in Adelaide. The AIRWAYS, her 2021 novel, was longlisted for the Miles Franklin Award and shortlisted for an Aurealis Award for horror. Dyschronia, which is an amazing book, highly recommend everyone should read that, came out in 2018 and was shortlisted for the Miles Franklin Award, the Aurealis Award for Science Fiction, and the Adelaide Festival Awards for Literature. Jen is a widely published essayist and advocate for the rights of writers and artists. That's hard to say, the rights of writers. An MEAA freelance delegate, a director of the Australian Society of Authors, and the current Essay Literary Fellow for the ASAA. ASA. I'm doing terribly with all these, Justina. I should have got you to do them. And as we said, Salvage will be published by Picador later this year, like next month. And so we've been reading Salvage. I don't know if you've got your copy there to hold up, Justina.
I absolutely
we're
do.
really lucky and got a really early
Oh,
advance copy
but
to
this is
read. There it is.
that's
Beautiful.
not what the real cover will look like, though.
It's just the arc. We're very lucky. So please join us and we'll chat to Jennifer. So welcome to the show, Jen.
Thank you so much for having me, Amy.
We're like so excited. I have been reading your books for quite a while and just have always been taken by just the uniqueness. I was saying to Justina, I always feel like I'm stepping into a completely different experience and it's so fresh. And we thought we'd invite you on this month, particularly because one of the things we've been talking about the last couple of weeks is how you can imagine a future or alternatives or ways of being into the climate future that are different from the past, that are different from the way we presently maybe conceptualize things. So before we get into broad questions like that, I was wondering if you could, without giving too much away, give our listeners an overview of what your new book Salvage is like, which is out in May.
Okay, well, Salvage is my short answer for what's your book about, because you always have to have one, has been it's about space billionaires. And it's true that the narrative kind of hinges on a space station project. But it's really, the space billionaires are actually quite peripheral to the main story, which is about a couple of sisters and one that leaves Earth and one that stays behind. And it's sort of looking at different ways of surviving the the perceived end of the world or the climate apocalypse that we think is coming in different
Mm.
ways. Different ways of managing the kind of panic and existential crisis. And really, yeah, I guess for me it was sort of it's sort of a book about our responsibility and our obligations of care to each other at a really fundamental level.
Mm.
But at the same time, I wanted to write something that was fun, plotty, sci-fi, a bit more page-turny, and a bit of an adventure because I felt like I couldn't write a book about escape without making it a bit of an escape in itself.
Yeah, we were talking about that last week about how sometimes climate fiction feels like it needs a plot structure, like you need to have something to hang it on, or it's just very depressing.
Yeah,
It's
I'm
just,
a real, like, I'm naturally a writer of atmosphere and landscape, and I tend to just naturally gravitate towards that way of working. Like, I love haunty feelings, I love horror, I love tension and this kind of just thinking about the relationship with the natural world in particular and the kind of all of that energy. And I'm not naturally a plotter. And it's something that I think I decided to work on and get better at. So I sort of set myself a technical challenge of trying to get a little bit better at it with this book.
so, and you picked an escape kind of thing. When you mentioned billionaires, I couldn't help but think, I don't know if you guys saw it, but on April Fool's, William Shatner posted a thing about how Elon Musk had approached him to be on the first manned mission to Mars and they were going to have Shatner City. And I was like, this is the world we're in, where I believed that for 30 seconds. Like I did. I sat there thinking, of course, Elon Musk would take William Shatner to space. And it's funny that this book would have been kind of quite out there sci-fi 10 years ago. And now we're like, oh, this is our life. Like we might
Yeah,
have people going to Mars.
absolutely. I started it in like during the pandemic lockdown, so beginning of 2020. And so I was already quite deep into it in 2021 when the space Blue Origin and these different kind of
The
like building
penis
a space
rockets,
base
all the
really
penis
kicked
rockets.
in. Yeah,
Yeah.
the penis rocket era, which now just seems like
A golden
nostalgic because
age.
when the billionaires were fun and cute and just had space programs while we were all dying of a pandemic. Yeah, and like things have gotten significantly worse and weirder since then, and I just feel like there's no point trying to track reality when you're writing. Like you just have to go
Mhm.
make your world kind of comprehensive and coherent and go with your instincts because whatever, yeah, the billionaires are going to be weirder and more evil than you can possibly imagine
Yeah,
anyway.
it feels like there's almost no way to satirize what's currently happening because as crazy as you can imagine it can be so much crazier.
Totally. It's a really hard time to be a satirist, and it's also quite a hard time to be a dystopian novelist. But I also think that these tropes or these forms are so familiar to us now that it's possible to be really, really playful with them. And so there's this kind of like maybe genre bursting happening at the moment where people are writing across multiple genres at the same time because it just feels like that reflects the reality of the world we live in. Like a friend of mine describes the climate crisis as like the greatest true crime story ever
Yeah,
told. And it's
That is
true.
an
Like,
incredible
it's
way of
true.
thinking of it.
Yeah.
yeah. And, you know, all of these kind of genres fold into each other. So I try not to think of it as too much of a problem and more of like an opportunity for some fun and play. That's just my coping strategy.
So you mentioned like being a dystopic writer or writer of dystopias. How would you, for people who maybe, aren't from academic backgrounds, how would you describe what a dystopian novel would be? Like how would you define it?
Yeah, so I guess there's sort of two sides of this conversation. One is dystopia and the other is utopia. And I try and play with both these kind of ideas at the same time in Salvage. But basically, a dystopia imagines an alternate world which has gone terribly wrong in some way, and almost stands as kind of a warning or well, what if this happens? What would we do? And so great examples are like 1984 or The Handmaid's Tale, both of which, you know, are quite reflected in our reality today.
Mm.
And then there's utopias, which are actually less common in fiction now. But it's something I wanted to play with because I think that we also need at the same time to imagine an alternative to the worst alternative. Like we need to imagine a better path, a better world, ways of living together that aren't catastrophic, as a way out of this mess. So I guess there's kind of a tradition of like a feminist or socialist utopia that goes back a couple of centuries. But the book that was really my talisman for this novel was The Dispossessed by Ursula Le Guin, which she describes as an ambiguous utopia. So I sort of was sort
That's
of holding on to that tagline
that's
in the
a
back of my
great
head.
term. That actually feels oddly comforting in 2025.
Mm,
Like the idea that, because I was going to say when you talk about the dystopias, imagining kind of a problem and the way we deal with it. They're almost not dystopian anymore. They're just us, the way we are. And the idea of like embracing ambiguity feels really comforting in this kind of polarized moment. The idea
I
of sitting in the kind of mess of it.
I think as well with like the idea of proposing a utopia in response to a dystopia doesn't quite work because people are so used to reading utopia with that thought of where's the catch here? Like how is this like the idea of perfection is unobtainable. So like
And
living in
perfection
that
for who, right?
ambiguity. Yeah.
yeah, and there's another Le Guin reference I'm going to make here, which is the short story "The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas," which is about a little town where everything is wonderful and they have a perfect festival and everybody's happy, and there is one child who is imprisoned in a dungeon and tortured so that everybody else can be happy. And some people are okay with that, and some people are the ones who walk away from that situation. And I think, yeah, we're not starting from a point of happy, we're starting from a point of like Gaza's happening. We're
Yeah,
starting from
yeah.
a point of people are already dying and sick. And like I always say, dystopia already exists now. It just like it has a postcode. If you don't live there, that doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, I guess it's just a literary tradition that I really like. Um, Mostly because it's a way of thinking about kind of politics and social organization.
Hmm.
And having that, knowing that we're not starting from zero, we're not starting from blank slate, we're not starting from perfect happiness. Like, we have to deal with what we've got, right? We
Mm.
have to deal with the world we've got. And so it doesn't matter how kind of idealistic you are, you have to be kind of open to a lot of different ways of
Yeah.
thinking. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm kind of jumping ahead in our
Jump
questions that
away.
Amy and I have brainstormed, but that makes me think of um in Salvage, you kind of get glimpses as into different ways that people are trying to organize in this climate emergency, in this like dystopian setting. And some of it is very collectivist, some of it's very individualist, and there's even this sort of almost looming, sort of almost authoritarian style as well. Like, was that something that you were thinking about when you were writing it, of like showing all the different ways that people are trying to wrap their head around on how do you exist amongst all of this?
Yeah, and it was kind of like passing through different ways of being while you're in the car and you just see glimpses going past because I wanted to really focus on Jude's life. This is the sister who stays on Earth. I wanted to focus on her life and her experiences going through these different situations rather than sit and like explain to the reader like how this is how this society works, blah blah blah, which A would be boring for the reader and B would be pretty boring for me. So like as someone who sort of prefers short stories, I have this habit of like gesturing at whole situations and being like, oh yeah, that's just a thing. Um, so there's little glimpses of things like in Australia, former Australia, where like treaties have gone wrong, but like we don't have treaties yet. So what happened there? Like I don't feel that in very much for the reader, but I wanted to create a like a parallel world that felt contemporary and that felt like it was just glancing off our reality at various points. Because I feel like all of these ways of coping and ways of being already kind of existing somewhere or being tried out somewhere. Like
Mm.
a lot of the more radical kind of collectivist stuff in the book comes from my own background in activism and organizing, whether it's through like environment or like through the union like just various things that I've done and things that I've learned about organizing together and some of the challenges
Mm,
of that. Like
mm,
it's not painted as a perfect way either. And then some of the more authoritarian kind of world stuff, I felt like I could gesture towards a fairly familiar kind of set of dystopian images, but it also doesn't feel that far off our world at the moment,
mm.
particularly with things like surveillance, military technology, and just the rapidity with which that's overtaking my own fictional imagination is kind of terrifying.
That sense of being observed and watched, and how that is sort of linked to almost a, I don't know, a sense of dread at times was something I was sort of noticing as I was reading. But yeah, I was like, I don't know. I don't have a question around that. I was just like, this is interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah, there's a little bit that's unanswered in the book about that, and I'm not entirely sure where it came from, but I certainly felt during the pandemic because I was overseas and then was stranded overseas when Scott Morrison shut the borders against us and stuff. So there was some really interesting kind of political movements that had a huge radical effect on my life. It wasn't just the initial lockdowns, laws about which country you could be in or not, where you could travel. It was then, oh, I can't get home, where's home? Um, these kind of big questions about identity and how easy it was for them to close the border on their own citizens and things like
mm.
that. And you look at what's happening in the US right now with ICE snatching people and disappearing them to these black site prisons in El Salvador. Like that is terrifying,
It's
dystopian.
it is, yeah. And the thing that struck me is that any illusion of safety is gone, right? If you're watching them do it to their own citizens.
And yeah, that's happened gradually. And yeah, it's been happening for a while in this like smaller scale way with ICE snatching people. But also that radical change has happened quite quickly. So you see this kind of build up and then this cascade. And so being like on the receiving end of the Liberal Party's knee-jerk immigration policy was a shock to me as a white person who grew up in Australia. But I'd also been watching it happen to asylum seekers and to
Mm.
migrants in Australia for a long time. And so it was like, whoa,
It
it's
can
just a
feel
really strange kind of discombobulating experience.
it can feel at times like you're living in alternate realities to other people, it feels, especially when there's so much misinformation and like almost willful misleading of people around these issues around, you'll have politicians blaming all sorts of difficulties on migrant communities and things like that. And it can feel like you're living just in a completely different world.
And I think as well, it's like, it's a really funny time to be writing fiction for that because you're just surrounded by so many fictions all the time. And
Mm.
it almost feels irresponsible on some level. Like, shouldn't I be encouraging people to think about facts, or shouldn't I be adhering closely to the truth when the truth is so under threat? But then
Mm.
as well, at the same time, I feel like in this era, being surrounded by all these different narratives and different versions of reality, there's almost like it's revealing the power of storytelling and the power of that narrative brain, which is how we're sort of stitched together,
Mm.
and certainly how we're stitched together socially. So, like something like a country or a nation is a fictional entity, really. And so, working in fiction, you naturally end up with this really political understanding of the world, whether or not you're aware of that. I certainly am.
We in some of our research, Alex Gothran, Rachel Hennessy, and I were looking at sort of narrative structures. It was interesting hearing you talk about that idea of like an escape plot, because we've kind of really been wrestling with the idea of the individual versus the collective. Um, and fiction, like novels, are such an individualist pursuit, right? It's one author although you do actually work collectively with a bunch of editors and a whole bunch of other people. But it's this myth of the single voice with often a plot hinging around an individual on an individual quest. And I was wondering if you thought about that, about the tensions in how you tell a story, or whether it's just baked in and we just go with what we have. I don't know. That's not a very well thought out question, but it's something
No,
I've
I
been
think about
wrestling
that one
with.
a lot, Amy. I really do. And I think like the hero's journey plot structure is really problematic from a feminist point of view. I also think I tried to subvert it a little bit with this book, with the kind of the mirrored stories, but also Jude is surrounded by others, even when she's kind of in denial of that. And so there is a sense of the friendship and the scaffold and the community that's holding her up in different ways. And I was very, very aware of that. I recently read this novel by Hisham Matar called My Friends, and it was really, really beautiful. Very sort of self-aware about this kind of the way that our relationships scaffold us and
Hmm.
radicalize us or hold us. Yeah, that made me think of that for some reason. But yeah, I guess I wasn't trying to um, break the wheel like I did
Yeah.
Dystonia, where I
Yeah.
was trying to sort of reinvent the novel structure. I think I was a bit more humbled this time around. And yeah, I think yeah, trying to stay in that space of play, I guess, between
Yeah.
respecting the structure and the way these things are kind of hardwired into us, but also wanting to undermine that or gently show other ways.
On that idea of play, um, because obviously writing about these kinds of existential crises is really emotionally taxing, right? And psychologically taxing. And but then we have also done some interviews with authors, and it seems, it's such an individual response. Everyone feels differently about their relationship to writing about it. And I was wondering what your relationship is like. Do you find it energizing? Do you find that it's cathartic? Do you find that it's giving you a way to get your hands in the problem? Or do you have to really take care of yourself while you're doing it because it is draining, or because it's a pretty huge topic to have to sit with every day, and a novel takes a long time.
Yeah, I think it's a probably I would reverse the cause and effect in that question.
Yeah.
I write about this stuff because it worries me, because it
Yeah.
scares the shit out of me, because I care about it and it breaks my heart. Um, Writing's what I'm good at, and I guess it's how I think I can help. I'm not sure how helpful it is, but I wanted to help. I want to be able to help people think through the problem and
Mm,
understand our place in it and what we can do, especially what we can do together, what we owe each other. And so I guess for me, like fiction is a way of figuring that stuff out in public, much like conversation is a way of figuring
yeah.
stuff out together. Um, I don't think that it's not harmless for me to worry about the world.
Mm,
It certainly does have an effect on you, but I think the world would have that effect on me whether I was writing about it or not.
yeah.
Um, and so it's a matter of taking that information and putting it somewhere I can make something out of it. It kind of
Yeah. If
doesn't
you
make it
get,
go away, but it makes me feel like I'm doing something.
yeah, well, it's an engagement, right? Rather than a passivity. That is a form of
Yeah.
engagement.
And
Yeah.
I'm just not, I can't be a denialist. I can't be someone who buries their head in the sand and pretends things aren't happening. That's not how I'm built. So I have to know about it and then I have to do something about it.
Yeah.
That's definitely something that comes across in Salvage, and that I was thinking about even, I mean, it's such a common trope nowadays, the idea of like leaving the earth as a way of escaping, an impending apocalypse. Um, and that question of responsibility is something that's like at the forefront of the book of like, you can't just escape and put your head in the sand, as you said, and just pretend that nothing's happening. There's always like we are connected no matter what to each other and to the world around us.
Yeah, and our bodies are part of the body of the world. Like our
Mm.
bodies are mostly the ocean. And I find it like I love science fiction. I get really excited about the idea of going to space. And I love the idea of like exoplanets and xenobiology and all this stuff excites me. But I also feel like I can't go there yet somehow. I'm not, I can't get excited about that kind of fiction because I feel like we haven't figured out what we're doing here. Um,
Yeah.
and there is a sense of like with the idea of going to Mars now or whatever, there is a feeling of like, well, we'll just set our house on fire and walk out the door, leave it burning behind us. And I'm not really okay with that approach. Also, I think it's kind of diluted because
Yeah.
you can't leave,
Like we're
like,
just
you
going to
won't
walk
have
into a
any
new
place.
house already set up or something. Like
You have
it's
to take
not.
all the oxygen and water with you. You have to take all the food. Like, we don't know how to grow things out there yet. Like,
I feel on a cellular. I was talking about that with someone the other day about all the billionaires going to space, and they were saying they would go, and I was just like, I think on a cellular level, I can't leave Earth. Even the thought
hmm,
of going into space, I feel this bodily rejection of it. Like, no, I am here. I am of this. It just feels strange, like ejecting part of your own body or something. Like it, yeah. I
I'm
resonated with me when you said we are ocean because I feel like, yeah, I can't leave my ocean.
I'm afraid of cruise ships, so the idea of being in a spaceship is like existentially terrifying to me.
Imagine being stuck next to someone you hate for the rest of your life.
but then there's something so beautiful about space as well. Like,
Yeah.
I mean,
Mm.
we all read Orbital, right? And just
Oh,
that like sense of wonder of being
yeah.
looking back on Earth and just being surrounded by this infinite universe, like it's incredible. So
Even having
I think
religious
that there's a bit
experience
of a
watching Brian Cox.
contradiction there. Like I want it to be, I long for it at the same time as I bodily reject it.
Mm.
Lost track of all my questions now. I'm so caught up in that the romance of that because I agree. Like Orbital was like a spiritual experience to read, and I
Yeah,
just
it's just like a
sat.
spinning top, that book. It just
Oh,
spins, sets you
yeah.
off, and then
And you
you're
come
meant to
back
be
to
drifting.
it, and you can dip in and out of it again, and just read a little bit of it. Yeah,
Yeah,
that
it
was
was
one
more
of
like an
my
experience of a piece of music than a novel,
yeah.
actually.
Um, so I was thinking about, sorry, this is also off our questions, but just looping back a bit, when you were talking about writing as sort of an expression of some kind of connection or with the crisis, like, and I think it's so complicated, I can't quite find the words for what you're actually doing when you're writing, because as you said, you're feeling all those feelings anyway. The crisis is here, you're living in it, and it's a way of doing something. But I was thinking about when you talked about it being a conversation, and I think there's something in the intimacy of the written word that you're going into someone's hands who's like we're picking up Salvage and reading your words, but you're allowing us space. That it's a bit like Orbital too. Like you're allowed space with that book. You don't have to respond to someone in a conversation in the moment. And it feels like Justina and I were talking earlier about how it's hard to actually find a bubble for reading sometimes now because we listen to audiobooks, we've got, everything happening all at once. Um, Even podcasts, people now mostly stick them on YouTube in the background rather than actually taking the time to listen.
Yeah.
So there's something about fiction and there's a power in it as an intervention or something in this crisis for that intimacy and that connection. Like when you're talking about collectivism and human working together, there's something even in just the act of fiction maybe that is working for good.
I think it's because a book is co-imagined with the reader. Like you're not like I create something and I want it to be a certain way, but I'm deliberately leaving a lot of space in there because the kind of reader I am is someone who likes to do the work and likes to imagine what's going on and guess and figure things out. So that's who I'm writing for. And I think that there's like yeah, there's something really magical in that process of co-imagining, and it's almost like a trust thing when you start writing, you set out to write, you trust that there's going to be eventually someone on the other end that is going to pick that up and like feel what you want, feel what you're feeling, think about what you're thinking. And it's not necessarily like an instrumentalist, I want them to think this way or
Mm,
feel this way. It's just like a little ping, a really big slow
mm.
ping
Yeah, yeah.
across
Yeah.
time and space. The writing itself often begins quite privately, and there is something about that inner life that really matters. You talk about everybody double screening all the time and having things on in
Mm,
the background, and I'm like chronic with that as well. But like I'll read a book with the news on the radio, which is just stupid. But um, there is something really private and pure about stopping to write because you have to stop. I have to stop everything. Like I can't
mm.
listen to music or anything when I'm writing. And first draft is usually longhand as well. And it's just this quiet little practice. Because I started this book in lockdown as well, I was really clinging to my rituals of practice in a really big way because that was what was helping me get through this crisis that was happening out my window. Um, and so I guess like that's always there, that daily practice of like when you're working on a book, go to your desk first thing in the morning,
Mm.
first draft if I'm writing longhand. I'm just sitting there with my thoughts and there's nothing, I'm often not thinking much even about what I'm doing. I'm just kind of letting it come out of me. And yeah, for me, they all start that way.
Mm.
I think there's still something of that left in the end product that is like the kernel of it.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
No, it does, because I would say there is something in your writing that is distilled, has that sense of being there in a moment and having that, because it's, I don't want to say stillness because there's like an energy in it, like an intense energy in it. So when you're writing, so you write longhand first thing in the morning.
Only first draft, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So do you find, does that release you from any perfectionism? Like you're just playing at that point, like there's no
It
finished
releases
book.
me from editing brain. So I guess that is perfectionism, although I'm not really perfect enough to be called a
That's
perfectionist.
smoking like a true
Too
perfectionist.
messy. But when I'm working on screen, I'm immediately going over what I've written and editing, and I think that's just a mental habit. So I like to write my first draft longhand and then type it in and play with it on screen as a second draft, and then I start thinking about structure and where things go. But I have to start with like, well, what's the material? Where are the images? And what's the
Yeah.
sound of it and the shape of it first?
This is a silly question, but it's not because I like writers obsessed with stationery. Like, do you get like a special new notebook or have you got a pen that you use or does it just have to be bog
Oh,
standard?
I'm a huge fan of like using the good stationery as a
Yeah,
gift to
good.
yourself. And this is like total product placement, but I'm addicted to these beautiful like Fabriano
Yeah,
notebooks.
beautiful.
They don't have any lines in them.
Yeah, I like paper with no lines. Like I get art books and I use
Yeah.
art notebooks. Yeah.
Yeah, the lines feel too much like that's rigid thinking.
Yeah. And
What
I
feels
like getting
natural.
textures and just being big as
I
well.
love that.
Breaks the lines.
No, I often start really tiny writing, like, not sure what I'm doing
Does it
yet.
get bigger
Yeah.
as you go looser?
Can I be mildly unprofessional and just duck off to the bathroom?
Of
Of
course
course.
you can.
Sorry.
It's all the flavor of things.
What's your go-to notebook, Amy?
Oh, do you know, I think I've got one here somewhere, although I might have it out in the back room because I'm on deadline. So I'm like really trying to be professional right now and write every day, which I'm not good at. They're just like the black. I just get them from Officeworks and they've just got the really textural paper, you know,
Like sketchbook kind of paper.
yeah, like
Yeah.
sketchbooks. And then I fill them with just, and I don't write longhand necessarily, but I just fill it up with ideas before I start. So if fragments, sentences, dialogue,
Yeah.
sketch is like just it's that thing of like play, right? That's the moment where you can let your imagination not have to be constrained.
Yeah, and you're
Especially
just
with
curious about things and you don't know how they belong yet, and you just pick them up
yeah.
and you're like, that weird image is gonna fit somewhere in that world, and I don't know how.
And you go back and you reread them, and you're like, what? Like, what
I
is
know.
that?
And find I think most writers do this, like find little notes to yourself in your phone's notes
What
app
does
or
that
something. Think,
mean?
what does that mean? That's nonsense.
Are
Why
you
would I write
drinking?
that?
Put the wine down.
Yeah. Or I'll like wake up at 2 a.m. and have this like thing that I think is a really good thought, and I'll send myself an email about it. And then in the morning I'll be like, no.
I'm like, it seems great at 2, but yeah. Um, so do you have like deadlines or do you have you got quite long deadlines so that you've got room to play?
I don't have deadlines for novels. They just take as long as they take. Nobody buys anything until you've written it anyway, in my world. But I do freelance, so I write full time.
Yeah.
It means that I'm often juggling like writing a book, working on another short story,
Yeah.
helping an artist write their artist statement, writing a review of something for a magazine, and teaching and going to a meeting about something else. So
Yeah. Yeah.
my days are rarely, I'm just going to write. If I have a day
Yeah.
like that, I'm like, oh, goody, how exciting.
Yeah.
Um, but usually I try and carve out the first couple of hours for my own stuff when my
Yeah.
brain is a bit more kind of
Loose.
the hasn't
Yeah.
built up the swell for the day.
Yeah. It's very hard to switch after
Yeah.
hours. It's very hard to switch off and just suddenly be like, be creative now.
Yeah, totally. And after doing something like talking to you guys, I wouldn't be able to go back to my desk and write because I'm in this like forebrain.
Mm. I'm
I
glad you said
definitely
that because
find that.
sorry, Justina, you go.
Oh, I definitely
Sure.
find that with writing, that I find that it takes me so long to get into this headspace where I'm just fully immersed in it that, you have to be quite protective of that.
Yeah. And I find I can go into that flow state quite quickly if I set myself up properly in the day and do it and like leave my phone in the other room, for example. But if I've got something to do that's nagging at me, like, oh, I really should answer that email, then I can easily get distracted by those things. And I'm sort of, I find that I'm getting a bit worse at multitasking as I get older, which is really
Me
frustrating.
too.
So that makes it a bit harder, but yeah.
Yeah. And focus. I think the way you described sitting down to write, that's ideal, right? Is to have it's a sense of drift for me. Like there's a drift in time and a drift in like you're just in this moment that's yours. And that's very hard to get now.
Yeah, and I think it's true of many different art forms, that kind of flow state. Like I know painters talk about that going to the canvas and then just losing
Mm.
a few hours and coming out of it, or like 10 hours sometimes. And I don't have that kind of long stretches of flow state anymore, but I find that I can get into it much more quickly if I create the conditions properly.
We need to go into orbit and just orbit and write for a while. Get away from
Yeah,
Earth.
the problem is I think you probably would have responsibilities in space because
Like
they just
exercising.
don't send you up there as a passenger.
Maybe writing could be treated like as a value in and of itself once.
Yeah,
That would
I
be
did an
good.
interview with Anna recently, and I was talking about my kind of ongoing fantasy. Like instead of a fantasy dinner party conversation, I have this like fantasy: who would I spend 6 months on the International Space Station with,
Oh,
like
this is
artist residency.
amazing. And
Yeah,
who
yeah,
would
I was
it
going to say
be?
writer in residence at the space station.
Yeah, it changes
Yeah.
a lot, but Laurie Anderson's usually there.
Ah, yeah. Makes sense to me. Justin, I've lost track of the questions. Do you have any more questions you'd like to ask?
Oh, I'm
There's so
sure I
many.
do. Oh, I did have a question about the sense of like the significance of material and materiality in the book, because I notice even the title Salvage is it's so tied into like what Jude does in terms of and the communities Jude is around in terms of salvaging things that are like left over from like a bygone era. And that's something that made me just think about materiality in climate crisis, and that being extremely aware of the objects that you use, the objects that you create and destroy equally as well. And was that I don't know, was that something that you were thinking of when you were writing it? Because yeah, I was just very fascinated by that the way the material is so embedded in the lives of the characters.
It's really really good to hear you say that actually,
Mm.
because materiality was one of the really core things around that I was thinking about in the airways as well, and the material and the immaterial and how those relate to each other. Um, and I think that that kind of continued as a like literary preoccupation, if you will, into this book. But I'm also just a person who's really into fixing things, old pieces of furniture. I will always repair rather than buy something new. My dad's exactly the same. And so I think it's just this cultural thing of like, maybe it's a bit of a metaphor as well, of like, well, there's so much destruction involved in manufacturing something new. And it's not really, that's always made from some material anyway and from somebody's labor. And I would rather like use my own labor to make something old feel useful again. Um, I think there's also, with the idea of salvage, is also embedded that kind of feeling of responsibility for others. And I was thinking about the like maritime law of salvage and like who, if you come across a boat in distress, there's a responsibility to help. And if you come across a ruin, there's a there's a
Mm.
finders keepers rule essentially, and how those things are kind of like disputed. But those are very, very old
Mm.
laws that are kind of traditional and have carried on, and we would still use them in our daily life without really thinking about it.
Yeah.
These kind of like moral rules about, you know, good Samaritanism or whatever. And I was thinking about the kind of the problem of repair as well, which I think is a really big problem, like social repair. What happens after this fascist turn that the United States is in? If we can keep it at bay here, like how do we help them recover from that? Like what's our responsibility to people in distress?
Mm.
All those questions.
I
I
find
kind of
what's
went away from the material then, but you know
yeah,
what I
that's
mean? The
well, I think
materiality has its own kind of metaphorical energy or purpose.
I think especially in fiction that's dealing with the apocalyptic, like the material becomes so hyper significant in a way that perhaps it needs to be more now, like thinking about the significance of objects now, um, as opposed to just in an apocalyptic or dystopian setting. And I don't know, it was interesting hearing you speak more metaphorically about the idea of salvage, because to me, salvage also has this connotation of rescue almost,
Mm.
of yeah, salvaging something that could have been lost or
It would have been
forgotten.
thrown away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm. Oh
Yeah.
man, we could keep talking to you for like the next 24 hours, I think, Jen. I think we're out of time.
For
Really
six
lovely to
months on a space
chat.
station.
Yeah, let's go
Yeah.
orbit. Let's go orbit and go keep ourselves well.
Who do
Um
I apply to for that to actually happen? I don't think any
none of the
funding body is going to
billionaires.
be able to afford it.
That's right. And no one wants to get on the Musk rocket. No one needs
Or maybe
that.
he'll be so flattered by my portrayal of space billionaires
Oh,
that he'll give me a
maybe,
spot. Hmm.
possibly. I think they should just all go. Let's just stay off you go.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you for joining us, Jen. Jen's book is out in May. I forgot the date already. May the
May the
20,
27th.
27th. But everyone can go on now and pre-order. Highly recommend. And you can also hit up Jen's past work. Um, she's won many awards. It's just incredibly thought-provoking work. And thank you for joining us to talk about climate fiction and how actually it is full of more than just fear. It's actually a place where we do have intimacy and connection and hope and humanity and love for planet and all of those wonderful things. So thank you so much for joining us, Jen.
Thank you so much for the conversation. It was wonderful.
That was great.
It was, I have to admit, am feeling like longing for her writing practice. So I want to get up into a room that pretty and sit in sunshine and just write longhand.
The idea of I was like, oh my gosh, can I even still write longhand? Maybe I should give it a go, especially
There's
if it's a
something
cure for
tactile, I
perfectionism.
reckon. I know that you type when you're typing, you are touching things, but there's something about holding the pen that's quite comforting.
And it makes you slow down as well and stop racing ahead and just actually think about what you're putting on the page.
Yeah, yeah.
I say
I
as if I
also,
do it. I
yeah,
don't.
we will now. We'll just check in with us next week and see if we're actually doing it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I hope everyone enjoyed that because it was I always find when I hear Jen speak about her work, I'm just like in awe of her brain.
Mm.
Like there's a kind of clarity that is very peaceful to her. Maybe she doesn't feel peaceful on the inside, but I experience it as very peaceful.
When you read the writing as well, you can see it's like the I'm thinking about like synchronized swimmers. It's like
Yeah,
so poised on top, but you can see all the work that's happening below it in that
yeah,
sense of like there's so much space of like for thought-provoking
yeah.
um like explorations of different things. It's a great read.
I mean, synchronized swimming is such an interesting thing because I've always thought of it like dancing too, but like the muscularity of dance, the way it looks so graceful and smooth, but you can see the bunched muscles. You're right. Like that's such a great way of thinking about her work. Anyway, thanks for joining us for Climate Fiction. Before we leave you, we're going to remind you that next week is our book of the month. And the book of the month is ideally on Side Chick Nation, which is a mass market romance, like an adventure. It's really like a romantic suspense adventure. Um, there's like sex in there and like intrigue. And it's a really interesting one for us to chat about what a climate fiction can look like and how plot interacts with it. Also to remind everyone, we're giving one of those away, which we'll announce at book club. So if you haven't entered, there's still time to enter. And then the other giveaway this month is Richard Powers' The Overstory, which when we were talking to Jen about the individual versus the collective, this is a really interesting book for not having an individual kind of hero. So we've got this copy to give away. So if you haven't entered, you have a chance to win either Side Chick Nation or The Overstory. So hopefully you can enter. And Justina and I are really grateful that you joined us today for that chat. And we will see you all next week.
We'll see you on the stream.
Yeah, don't forget your cocktail. We all need a mojito or a mojito.
Yes,
Yes,
absolutely.
stock up on rum. Okay, we'll see you guys next week.
Bye.